Welcome back to San Francisco. We are on the ground here on runway 28 right. We are not, this time, going anywhere. Instead, we're going to do a little feature called How Not to Land the Dash. The Majestic DHC-8 Q400 and the DHC-8 Q400 in real life are both known to be notoriously difficult to land. In my opinion, and it's only my opinion, as we turn our bleeds to min here and get ready to go, that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but there are some special considerations that make this different in landing than just about any other plane you're likely to fly in flight sim for a whole bunch of reasons, and I can show you by popping outside. But before I do that, let me just turn down the volume here a little bit so that we're not competing so aggressively with the airplane itself, as nice as that sound is, as lovely as that turboprop sound is. If you've flown a lot of Flight Simulator, there's a good chance you've flown a fairly small plane, like a Cessna 172 or 182, or a very big one, like, say, a PMDG 777. And each of those planes actually has its own characteristics that make it reasonably easy to get a fairly nice landing almost all the time. Both of them are kind of wingy airplanes, and even though you don't fly them exactly the same, each one has a certain forgiving quality to it, as long as in the case of, say, the 777, you stay ahead of its energy and power curve, which you have to do in this too, but I'll explain that in a minute. Briefly speaking, the characteristics of the Dash that make it a handful to land unless you know what you're doing are the following. If we pop outside here, take a look at the wing. The wing on the Dash is a thing of technological beauty. It is as small as it can possibly be, and yet still hold the plane up in the air. And by that I mean that it is designed to be ever so efficient in the cruise. So it is shaped like a dagger. It is small. It has a limited thickness and length and width. It is designed for the least amount of drag and the least amount of fuel burn possible, which is why this thing can go about 340, 350, 360 knots at altitude. But it is a very highly loaded wing. In other words, there's a lot of the rest of the plane being held up by as little a wing as possible. If you put much more wing on it, a deeper wing, a longer wing, it would be more forgiving, but the longer, the bigger the wing is, the more drag there is on it. So you would be using more fuel to pull it through the air. The other characteristic is that this is a stretched airplane, which means that there is an awfully long length of fuselage behind the wing and in front of the wing. And what that means is, well, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. What this thin, highly loaded wing means is that it takes a lot more pitch change to affect sink rate, plus or minus, than a big, more lightly loaded wing would. In other words, in order to change the flight path vector of this whole unit, you have to comparatively at least, dial in more degrees of pitch up or down than you would with, say, a Cessna, which has a wing that is supporting a whole lot less weight per area of the wing. Now, that would all be well and good. You could just say, all right, well, fine. I want to shallow out my descents, so I'll crank in more pitch. The problem then comes when you look at the fuselage, which goes way the hell back here and way the hell up here, which means that if you actually put in as much pitch as you need to, say, arrest your sink rate when you come in for a landing and you're in your flare, boom, you'll end up hitting your tail. So in addition to the heavily loaded wing, which requires more pitch to affect the flight path, you've got a fuselage that is so long that it cannot tolerate big adjustments in pitch this way when you get close to the ground, because you'll hit something. So at the very moment when you would want to be able to crank up the nose and crank up the nose and crank up the nose to slow down your drop, you can't. So thump, you hit the runway. So that's a very big limitation. On the other hand, what you've got is you've got these two giant Pratt & Whitney 150A turboprops, and those can get you out of almost any situation imaginable. The problem is they've got a little bit of a lag. Now, getting back to our pitch, a small adjustment in pitch certainly will affect your flight path vector, your glide path, but only very far out from the runway, because it's simple geometry. If you adjust your pitch by 1 degree, that makes an enormous difference in whether you land right here or all the way up here. The closer you get, the more pitch you need to alter where you're going to hit the ground and at what rate. And of course, again, we get back to the problem of having a long fuselage. So, all right, you say, well, I'll just use my engines for that. Well, then the problem you run into is you've got a little bit of a lag. The two engines here can get you out of almost any jam, but it takes a second or two to do them. The lag is not as bad as older turboprop engines, but there is still a little bit of a lag. So you have to think very carefully about the coupling of power settings to flight path, and you have to think a little bit ahead of it. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. What we're going to do is we are going to show you any number of bad landings in sequence, things not to do, and then with any luck, if we get this right, we'll do all the things you need to do to make it all come together. If you want the too long didn't read version, basically it is to hold your pitch as constant as you possibly can, and if possible, adjust your flight path, your sink rate, especially as you get closer and closer to the runway, with your power. It also means not obsessing over right here your V speeds, and instead obsess on maintaining a constant pitch picture or runway picture right here, and actually to start out with your runway picture right about down here instead of right about here, so that you assume a more realistic descent profile, and you automatically, without even thinking about it, dial in the right power to keep your pitch picture, your runway picture, and everything else constant. So, in fact, as the author of a really great PDF document, a real dash pilot, put it on a supplement to the Majestic Q400 documentation, which I'll put a link to in the video here. You don't actually fly V-speeds in the dash, or at least he doesn't. You only think you do. What your primary scan is going to be is this or that, with this as your means of adjustment, if possible, And if you maintain a 3-degree glide path, and if you maintain, about a degree or 0 degrees nose up using 15 degrees flap, or a little bit of nose down using 35 degrees flap, you'll find that these V-speeds, actually these are my takeoff V-speeds, but the landing V-speeds will work themselves out, and you will naturally arrive at it. The other thing is, except for exceptionally short field landings, it is always better to carry a little bit more energy than a little bit less energy into your dash landings. So we're going to briefly show you all the different ways you can go wrong as I just reset our altimeter a little bit. What I've done is I've programmed in to the FMS a little bit of an ILS approach, and our FMS will take us out to Truckin, and a let me try that again in English this time, a downwind leg to this fix here, whose name escapes me, which is Decet, and then turn to Dumba, and then into Seppen, and onto our approach. I may just cut that short for the sake of cutting it short. We've got the bridge behind us, as you'll see, as a good landmark, and we've got 3,000 set in the box as an altitude. We'll set out cell. I'm just in LNAV at the moment just because it'll be a convenient way to get us to tie-dye. I said Truckin, but it's actually tie-dye, which is right over Oakland. And do a quick little scan here, make sure everything is kosher, and it is. We're also going to pretend that we are the only airplane on Earth here in the San Francisco Bay Area, so we're not going to really have to worry about any traffic, so we'll do some touch and goes and all the rest of it. But here we go on the first example of how not to land the dash. And our takeoff power is set. And we got 80 knots, and we've got a reasonable frame rate there. I was just checking. Did a little computer tweaking, so wanted to make sure that was good. We'll pull up to our 10 degrees pitch, bring up the gear, maintain that 10 degrees, bring up the flaps, looking for 1,000 feet, at which point we'll bring back the props. We'll turn to tie-dye right here. And I think the first thing we'll do is a bad landing with the sort of cardinal mistake that almost everybody makes when they jump into this plane for the first time from almost any other aircraft. And I'll keep you in suspense, and I'll save it for when we actually do it. Just trim out our rudder a little bit. I forgot to crank in some rudder trim. And I'll bring our props back to cruise right now. And I'm just going to bring our power down because there's no need for us to go crazy here. I find that one of the hardest things to do is just to fly a simple pattern in the dash because it is so overpowered, and it really it just loves to go. Alright, we're in a little bit murky environment here, so we will fly out to tie-dye and we'll make our turn. I've got Active Sky Next providing the weather, and it's Well, I forgot. This is what San Francisco weather is like, so we'll just quickly do the procedure here. Stay below 250. Make sure we've got our ILS frequency set. And we are sequencing. Let me just see if I can arm the approach right now. I'm sure I can. Nav, arm approach. Don't want to activate because that would give me an instant vector right about to there, which we don't need. Now we are going to basically make the cardinal mistake of all landings in the mighty dash. And it's something to really unlearn, because when you fly either, it's funny, this is one of the instances where if you fly either a Cessna or a 777, this is the one thing that you're accustomed to doing. And it is one of the hardest things to unlearn in a large turboprop with a stretched fuselage and a skinny wing, namely the dash, but I suspect also the ATR 72. Although I have to check on that, but I can't imagine it's different. As a matter of fact, it may be more so, because it's got a skinny little wing and it's got even less power. It's got, its main differentiation is that it's got half of the power that the dash has, which makes it cheaper to fly, but it's slower. Anyway, we're about to turn base. Just want to see our airports nearby. I think that is, you know, I don't know that airport down there. I want to say it's Livermore, but I'm not sure. This, by the way, is, that was Flightbeam San Francisco HD, and this is Orbix's NorCal scenery. And the other nice thing about the dash is that you can see we're getting anywhere from 38 to 45, 50 frames in probably the most demanding scenery out there. And it's still looking reasonably good. It is a very frame rate friendly airplane. Anyway, let's get ourselves configured for landing. Our pumps will stay on, and we will go into reduced noise profile landing. We're going to land at flaps 15, and the reason why is because it gives us, in a way, the most landing friendly profile, in the sense that you come in about 1 degree nose up and you flare to about 3 degrees or 4 degrees nose up. So it's not a big change, whereas with flaps 35 you come in about 2 or 3 degrees nose down and come up to around 2 degrees, and that can present difficulties. Alright, we're just going to set our landing runway heading to 284, which it is, and we will we'll fly this approach. We're at a decent speed. And we are going to deliberately screw up this landing. With any luck, we'll keep the plane in one piece. So we're sort of over the wetlands here. There's some salt farms, I think, over here, where they pen in a little piece of the bay and then they let it dry up and then they dig the salt out of it. It's pretty gnarly. Retrim our rudder a little bit. Very soupy weather. Alright, so we're at 3,000 and we need to be at 3,000 at Seppen, at which point, as soon as we turn right here, I will get us into heading mode and get us established on the ILS. Just bring our speed down a little bit, come down to below 200 and drop our first notch of flaps. See, we're going to overshoot and we're going to have to re-intercept from the left, which is no problem. Got plenty of room to do it. Just rolling off the power here. Let's get our V speeds. Alright, our V1 is 129, so keep your eye on that and keep your eye on this. Switch us over to nav 1. We're on a nice intercept here for the localizer. We're below the glide slope. Put out our first notch of flaps. Pop us into approach mode. And we will get ready to make our first mistake. Just make sure we start going down the hill. There is the bridge. That's the scenery loading right there. We'll put down our gear at the bridge. We've captured localizer, and in a second we'll there we go, we've captured the glide slope. And we're going down the hill. So now I'm going to come down on the power and I'm going to get us right damn close. I'm actually going to set a VAP of about 132. We got a little bit of a tailwind. Nothing too horrible. Down comes the power.
2,500.
In comes the localizer. A little bit disappointed we can't do this visually, but it's basically going to be the same thing. Now I'm going to slavishly keep my eye on our V1 speed. So I'll let that come down. Bring in our next notch of flaps. And bring in our final notch of flaps. And we're a little bit to the right of the localizer, but with any luck we'll work our way back in. Take a look at our HUD there. And we are in full landing mode. Not going to play around with that right now. Instead, okay, there we are. So we are going to be slavishly at
1,000.
V1. A little slow. All right. Just get ourselves fully set. Take out the autopilot. Now, I'm doing the one thing that will actually ensure a good dash approach. I'm fully configured early. So, shame on me. I'm actually doing the right thing here. And again, I'm adjusting my power, so we are slavishly on our V1. And I'm going to land this like I would a jet.
Plus 100.
Okay. Again, we're still coming down beautifully. Nothing wrong with any of this.
Minimums. Minimums.
Okay, I'm right at V1.
100. 50. 40. 30.
Roll off the power.
20. 10.
Oh, boom! 300 feet and a bounce and a smash. Okay, so around we go. So lesson number 1, do not, under any circumstances, roll off the power. Ever. It's like in Mommy Dearest, no wire hangers ever. No rolling off the power ever, because those skinny little wings I showed you will not tolerate it. They simply won't take it. They have nothing there to hold you up. So we don't want that. So let's get ourselves going again here. Bring our props back to climb. Come around the corner. And try again. And this time, we are going to fly it like you would fly a Cessna. And you'll see why that is a no good too. Before we do that, let's go direct to tie-dye and get us back into nav mode, and let us go here. Make sure we capture our altitude, bring our props back to cruise, roll our power back a little bit, and get back in the game. Now, this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I can see it, I'm going to look for the bridge, and we will fly this like we would fly a Cessna, and you'll see how that can easily go wrong. When I see the bridge, we'll just turn in and we'll come in visually. Again, we'll set up for a reduced noise profile landing. There we go. I don't know if I'm going to be able to see the bridge, but what we will do is we will just make do and turn ourselves the way we need to. I think we'll see something. Wow, look at that murk. Alright, so I've oversped my flaps a little bit, but so far so good. Our next waypoint is Deckett, but instead we're going to turn right about here. See if I can see that bridge as we go past it. There it is. Okay, so there's the bridge. So let's make for the bridge, and we're going to land this like a Cessna. And you'll see how that turns out. So in a Cessna or any other small plane, the great fear is that an engine will quit in the pattern. And gosh darn it, you want to be set up so that you're a little bit high and you can just glide on in. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do an approach like that. So we'll hold ourselves level. We're turning base here. We're high. And we will come around the turn. We'll turn final, and then we will roll off power and bring it in the way you would like that. Just keeping an eye on the bridge there, holding us level. Hoping that we'll be able to see the bridge, see the runway by the time we get to the end of this bridge. And this is another problem people have when they fly the dash. They come in high and then they are hosed. So, can't see the runway, but here's what we'll do. We'll flip over into our ILS, our nav1, and you can see there's the golf course, and in a second we'll be able to see the runway. I hope.
Caution, terrain. Caution, terrain.
Alright. We'll come off the power a little bit. And there we go, we're intercepting the localizer. And we are 1.5 dots above.
Terrain. Caution, terrain.
And we're turning final. There's the runway. Okay, you see we're over white. And we're fast and high, so we'll keep ourselves just a little bit high. Same way you would as if you were flying a Cessna.
Caution, terrain. Caution, terrain.
And then we'll come off the power.
Caution, terrain. Caution, terrain.
And put down the gear. And put down the flaps. And we are going down at 1,500 feet per minute. And we are fast and we are unstable. But we'll make the runway if an engine quits, but that's not really a consideration. And we'll bleed off speed and bleed off speed.
500.
And
Too low, terrain. Too low, terrain.
and put in our final notch of flaps like you would in a Cessna.
Minimums, minimums. Sink rate.
Oh, and we can't pitch up enough.
10.
Then we float, and that was not the worst landing in the world, but that's really no way to fly. And so we'll go around again. And this time, we'll try to do it the right way. Bring up the flaps. Set my climb bar to toga. Get back into FMS mode. Go direct to tie-dye. And get back in the game. Up comes the last notch of flaps. Back come the props. In comes out cell. And in comes nav. Now, as you've seen, pitch is no way to arrest your sink. You simply, at some point, especially when you're flying slow, you simply cannot do it. So let's not do it. The way to really get it right is to pretend you're doing a Navy-style carrier landing. Constant pitch and adjustments with power, and fairly minor adjustments with power, or at least carefully monitored adjustments with power, because a small change will have a big effect, but only after a second or two lag. So sometimes you have to put in a little bit too much and walk it back, and a little bit more and walk it back. But that's something you can easily get a feel for. What you can never get a feel for is yanking the stick around enough to make the other pieces fall into place, because it simply won't happen. So we'll slow ourselves down a little bit, and we'll fly the full approach this time. Only this time what we'll do is we will try to get ourselves, we won't look at the speed precisely or exactly. Instead, what we'll do is we will get the correct vector and the correct sink, and we will adjust that so that it is smooth and stable using the power, and we'll find that our airspeed will fall into place naturally. Because if we have to pitch up too much, it means we're going too slow, and if we have to pitch down too much, it means we're going too fast. So the very process of holding this pitch at about +1 degree, +2 degrees, and staying on that glide path, that will automatically equate to the proper airspeed. And what we will actually do is we will actually use the power levers to affect our not synchronization, but sync rate late in the flight, right near the flare. As a matter of fact, what I'll do is, you'll see in a minute, is I will walk the power levers forward ever so slightly at about the 30 or the 20 call out, and then bring them back ever so slowly. And then, instead of flaring at a constant rate, the other thing I forgot to show you is that we can pop out right here. The landing gear is right there, and when you rotate the plane, this is a lot like an old 727 landing. When you rotate the plane, of course, you are rotating it this way on an arc like this, and those landing gear are right on that arc. So as you rotate the plane, you're actually rotating the landing gear back onto the plane. So as you're pulling back to try and decrease the sink rate, you're physically moving the gear right here closer to the runway, so you're levering it onto the runway. So what you want to do actually is ease up on your back pressure almost immediately after you establish your landing pitch. In some circles, that's what's called the Boeing push, because that was an old technique for 727. What you would do is you'd pull back to flare, but then an instant or two before the wheels, the main gear, hit the pavement, you would relax that back pressure ever so slightly, or even give it a very slight nudge forward. And that would unload the forces levering those main gear onto the runway, and instead you would settle on with a nice little kiss. Now, you remember we were talking about speed and pitch, and how establishing the right pitch and power would, or working backwards, establishing the right attitude and power would then fill in the third item in the equation, which is the airspeed. You can work backwards from that too. You notice how we're pitched up at about 2.5 degrees? That's because we're actually going very slightly too slowly, and As a result, the airplane is pitching itself up a bit. If we slow down even more, it will pitch itself up and up and up and up until it reaches its critical angle of attack and it will stall. But we're not going to do that. Watch what happens when I pop in one notch of flaps. We'll float a little bit, but then you'll notice that this will come down. So one notch of flaps goes in. You see we float up, but see how our nose is coming down? So, all right, we are at 190 and we're about to turn final. And again, when we turn final, I will switch us over to Blue Needles. And I'm going to fly the flight director, but as you'll see, I'm not going to make big pitch changes. I will make power changes. I hope. I could always screw it up. And I confidently say, and you'll see, it'll result in a beautiful landing. I don't know. We'll come off the power just a little bit, and our airspeed will decrease, and our pitch will increase. I'm going to wait till we overshoot this a little bit, actually, and then we'll re-intercept from the other side. Oh, we might be going slow enough to do it directly. By George, I think we have. All right, as soon as we get wings level here, the other thing is that I'm going to come down to about 17% torque. Now, there are no magic numbers when it comes to that because it varies with weight and weather conditions, but somewhere in that ballpark, I just know from experience, works. So, into our nav mode, into our approach mode, and that should get us there. Bring down our gear, wait for the scenery to load. That's because the gear isn't fully down. And you see how we pitch down? I'll set a reduced noise landing again. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to fly the HUD right here in a second, and you see right now we're about 5 degrees nose down, and that's because we're fast. So I'm not really going to look at this, but what I am going to do is I'm going to pull back our power a little bit. I'll pull it back a little bit more. And I'm still ignoring the airspeed in a way. Make sure we're fully configured. Okay, flaps 15. So I'm going to roll off our airspeed, our power, and I'm going to be aiming when we come over the threshold for about 0 pitch here. Now you see the nose coming up as we lose speed, and it comes up, and it comes up, and it comes up, and we're at the outer marker, and it's still coming up. Now, because there's a lag, I'm going to feed the power back in very slowly. So, I'm maintaining that pitch picture, and I'm maintaining that pitch picture. And I'm going to keep that, if at all possible, right about a little bit above where we are now, but not much. So I'm going to fly the plane here, and I'm going to bring our nose up just a bit. And again, I'm keeping that pitch picture constant. just a little more because we're below glide path. So we'll come up on that. And again, we naturally just come up about a degree or two. But I'm holding the pitch constant. And when we need to adjust our flight path, I'm going to, early in the game, bring in more power. Okay, we're perfect right now on our flight path vector. Absolutely perfect. But we're settling into more of a sink, so I'm going to bring in some power. See how we were sinking towards that 3-degree line? Again, keeping the pitch right constant. Constant pitch. Come over a little bit here. Line us up. Line us up. Walking back the power just slightly. Keep the pitch right about where it is. I'm not even looking at the throttles. I'm just looking at where my pitch is. Okay, there we go. Again, I'm about a ½ degree nose up.
Minimums, 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 minimums. 40, 30.
Pitch up very slightly,
20,
bring in the power,
10.
and roll it off, and ease the nose forward ever so slightly. And there we are. And that landing was on center line in the touchdown zone, and as you can see was at 129 feet per minute. So we did not try to grease it. It was a positive landing, but the criterion for a good landing and a stable approach is minor changes to pitch and power, which we had, on the center line, which we were, and less than 300 feet per minute at touchdown, and we were well within those parameters. So that is considered a good industry standard arrival, and we did it without obsessing over our V-speed, but it naturally ended up where it should be, and we did it without yanking the pitch of the plane around, and we did it totally stable the entire way down. So the trick is basically to fly an approach in the dash, maintaining a relatively constant pitch, using power to adjust and power to save you if you need to, and also by using power ever so slightly early in the game before things deteriorate too badly. So you need to spot a trend quickly. And if you can do that, you can refine that technique. Like, for instance, looking back on that, I probably could have rolled in just a little bit more power, just slightly higher, and given the nose just a little bit more of a push and held it off just a little bit longer, and we would have touched down practically with no vertical speed. But I mean, the aim of the exercise when you've got passengers in the back is to get on the ground smoothly and safely, and with the minimum of moving parts. And with that, you've basically reduced the moving parts in your equation, in your landing, to power and pitch, and that's it. Anyway, with that, hope you liked it, and I'll think up some other little tutorials and things if I can to help everybody fly this unbelievably cool airplane as well as it can be flown, because it really deserves the best, and it really rewards the effort, and it is so much fun and such a pleasure to fly well. So with that, with the tall grass growing here at KSFO, I'll see you next time.